Hi, I'm Stacy. I'm a registered nurse. I've been in healthcare for 28 years. Welcome back to my channel, My Life in Scrubs. I thought I would talk today about a difficult topic. Have you ever had a time whenever you had a conflict with a supervisor or a coworker, and how did you handle it? What was something that you did to resolve the conflict or to get through it if it couldn't be resolved? So I often think of a time when I was a nurse and I had a CNA that for some reason the CNA just didn't particularly like me. And the CNA was usually confrontational, and I actually had to send the CNA to clock out and go home. And that's never an easy thing to do. I don't want to leave other CNAs short, and I don't want to make a scene. And it seems like sometimes when you're having a conflict, a scene will occur, and it may be you that acts unprofessionally, and it may be the person that you're talking to that's not going to be professional. And you have to know what to do to diffuse that situation. I have had to send people home. It's the unfortunate part of being a supervisor. Sometimes you have to tell people to go home and come back and talk to the director the next day because they're not doing their job safely, or they're creating conflict among other coworkers. And there have been times whenever I have been on a shift not when I was the supervisor, but when I was there and had to be a witness to the police being called to remove somebody from the building. And that's not a pleasant experience. Other times, I can think of a time when I had a supervisor who would come into the morning meeting, and her personality was high energy, and she would often call everybody out for something that maybe she could have talked about privately in an insulting manner about things that people needed to improve, or things that she didn't feel particularly went the way that she would have handled them. It made to have somebody start your day with insults and conflict it kind of brings your morale down in the group. You don't feel like you're set up for a good day when somebody is negative toward you first thing in the day. And I will say that in that situation, I did speak to that supervisor about how I was feeling. And I think it did improve to some extent. But what you have to realize is that people are who they are. And you have to decide when you're in a work situation, much like a relationship, if it's something that you're able to tolerate. Sometimes a conflict isn't going to be resolved, and you have to decide whether you're going to continue working there and try to maintain your professional attitude, knowing that your personality just isn't going to jive with this person and you can be professional with them, or you have to maybe sometimes decide that this isn't the job for you, right? Sometimes people can't work together. It's just the way it is. Sometimes a conflict cannot be resolved. Sometimes talking about it and troubleshooting through the problem and acknowledging a person's feelings is critical to resolving the conflict. It's okay to say that someone hurt your feelings. It's okay, because we're people. And being professional doesn't mean not having any emotions at all, but it means not reacting emotionally in a difficult situation. And sometimes that's very challenging because as human beings, we want to plead our case or say how we feel in the moment. And some people don't ever tell you that you have offended them, and they will just leave. So it's really important to think about how you are talking to others. And if someone is talking to you in a way that makes you feel unsafe, unappreciated, or disrespected, it's important for you to be able to, sometimes you need to say to the person, hey, can we talk about what happened this morning? I didn't feel good with how that was handled. Was there a different way that we could have approached the situation in the future? If you need to talk to me, like I want people to tell me if I did something wrong. And I hope if I've ever made somebody feel called out in public in a supervisory position, that they would feel comfortable to come to me and say, hey, I wish you would have talked to me privately about that. It's not easy to be the person who is at the receiving end of something negative, and it's not always to be easy to be the supervisor and figure out how to give out correction or constructive criticism. I mean, sometimes you do have to tell someone that what they're doing isn't acceptable, it isn't right. I mean, that is part of learning. If you're doing something wrong, you have to know you did wrong, and you have to be able to acknowledge that you need to correct it. And if you're the person that has to tell someone that they did wrong, you have to be able to deliver that information in a respectful, constructive way so that they can correct it themselves. I think it's very challenging as human beings to not want to react to somebody when you feel that they have slighted you, or you feel that they have acted in a way that you wouldn't maybe act. But sometimes people just are who they are, and it's one of those things where sometimes you can't take it personal, because sometimes a person can be really blunt and they don't have a soft way of delivering that information, and they're never going to. Some people are just going to tell you straight up what they think and what they feel, and it might hurt your feelings. And you have to ask yourself if that information that they're saying to you, you kind of sometimes have to look at it internally and say, is this true? Is this really something that I need to fix and improve about myself? Because sometimes it is true, right? Sometimes somebody will tell us something that we don't want to hear about ourselves, and we have to accept that that really is true. Now, if you correct that situation and that conflict still isn't resolved, you might just have to accept that it may not be resolved. And again, if you have a conflict with someone, sometimes you have to ask yourself, is my job something that I enjoy doing enough to stay here despite this conflict that isn't resolving? Because when you have an unresolved conflict, sometimes that adds stress to your day. Sometimes you dread seeing that person that you're having a conflict with. But I think that sometimes you just have to let it go and move on with your day and not let it affect you. Because just like in relationships, my grandma once told me in a relationship that you can never go into a relationship with the idea that you're going to change someone. All you can do is decide if you can live with how that person is, who they are, and if you can, then proceed. And if you can't, then leave. And I think that it is that way with all relationships. You have to decide if you can accept who a person is as they are. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't call things out if something dangerous is happening. Sometimes you have to say something in the heat of the moment to stop a dangerous situation or a safety concern. But I think it's a good learning point. When you feel that you have been slighted, you need to look internally at yourself and ask yourself if you ever do that to other people. Because I think sometimes when we're in a position of authority and we have pressures on us to make sure that things are running smoothly, it's always possible that your supervisor got yelled at by their supervisor. That's something that we don't think of in healthcare. Everybody has somebody above them, and it just keeps going up to the top. And the people that supervise us in healthcare are usually in the middle, because they're the people that are advocating for the people on the floor, on the unit, in the field. And they also have to respect and honor the duties that they have to do that are coming down from the top. And I think that that's a really challenging position to be in. And I think that it's just really important to address conflicts without becoming overly emotional. You know, when you're at home and you're having a conversation with your family, you get passionate, right? Sometimes you yell, sometimes you throw things, sometimes you want to just let it all out, but you can't behave that way in a professional situation, right? So sometimes you just have to walk away. Sometimes you have to walk away and collect yourself and recognize your own attitude and be accountable for that. And if a person says to you that you're doing something that you shouldn't be doing, then you have to really look at what they said to you without taking into account the way that they said it. You can't let it hurt your feelings when somebody is giving you that correction. You really need to look at yourself and say, am I doing this? Is this correct? Is this an accurate assessment of it? I myself have a tendency to think about it over and over if a person tells me something like that I did something wrong. I don't want to do things wrong. I don't want my integrity to ever be questioned. I don't want my judgment to ever be questioned. I want people to look at me and know that I know my stuff and that I'm doing it correctly, and that I value my position and my education. And the thing is that people are going to question you. They're going to question you because not everybody thinks the same way. And unfortunately, when you are working in a profession where you're taking care of people, there are going to be personalities that just aren't going to jive. And that's even true of patient care, right? You're going to have patients that you don't agree with their lifestyle, you don't agree with what they did to get where they are, and you don't agree with the things that they're saying to you. But as nurses, as health professionals, we cannot allow our personal feelings to become, we can't allow our personal feelings to rule our judgment. We have to give our patients care despite how we feel or if we disagree with how they're living their life, right? And it's the same way with your coworkers. You're not going to agree with everything that your coworkers do in their personal life. You're just not. Everybody isn't going to like everybody. That's part of being a person. Everybody's personality isn't going to get along with everybody's personality. And you just have to be at a place where you accept that and move on and continue to try to have a positive attitude and have a good day. When was the time that you had a conflict with a supervisor, a coworker, or that you were the supervisor and you had a conflict? And how did you deal with that? What were some things that you did to diffuse the situation? What were some things that you did that had positive outcomes? I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And I thank you for watching. If you have any interesting things that you would like me to talk about or tell me, I would love to hear about it in the comments. And I would love it if you would like, subscribe, and follow if you like my content. And I hope to see you soon.